The Black Ship. Chapter 2. Matcha Central Command. If there was something to be praised about the prince's staff, it was that they took security seriously, and all divisions worked diligently, not only pretending to take their roles seriously. Jade felt no shame in admitting that much, as he logged a small error in a delivery of spare parts, likely the product of a no-notice smuggler trying to earn extra credits. Simultaneously, he ensured that 2 other shipments would be delivered at a different location, while a third would be rescheduled to another date several days down the line, hindering the supply train heading to Fentus shipyards. Jade knew his little disruptions, while masterfully masked and untraceable back to him, were ultimately nothing more than small annoyances that would amount to nothing. But that was all right. Every stab he made didn't harm the colossal beast he was perched upon. But it did show him where the skin was thinnest, where he could do more damage, and where information leaked as blood from a wound. The patterns were there, buried in the countless data streams, ship movements, and never-ending reports. A chaotic whirlpool that could drive any lesser mind into insanity. But for him, it was only a matter of knowing what to look for and how to abuse it to his benefit. And he was very good at both. He didn't have direct access to the most valuable information regarding fleet movements, operations, and missions. His mask was still beneath notice, but with every display of competence, every almost insignificant deed carefully manufactured to appear natural, would set the eyes of those above on him. Yet he'd already discerned that the prince was now on the offensive, with 2 fleets striking into Khan territory. The real treasure, however, came with the news of the second princes emerging within Khan territory, far away from the front lines, creating mayhem and claiming the lives of 3 Kens so far. The reports were short and succinct, barely more than a small confirmation that an operation was carried out and that their target was secured. Nothing more. It was frustrating to work with so little, but it wasn't an impossible task. And yet, one small, almost insignificant part of the first report gave him pause, a single mention of Wyatt Staples. Jade felt his composure fracture for a split moment every time he read, heard, or remembered that name. Despite his investigation showing that Wyatt Staples was of mere commoner stock, with no special training or plot behind his upbringing, his hatred toward that man only increased. The fury in his heart was justified. The humiliation he felt was real. How could an uneducated plebeian with no previous experience beyond hauling trash and barking at the command of his betters ever best him? How was he able to lie to his face so totally that he detected nothing afoul? Every memory of their interactions up to the execution of his trap that ended in the destruction of the ring of true loyalists he deformed with so much care made his blood boil. While he scurried in the dark, that damnable man had been elevated by the pretender prince and taken into the inner circle of the prostitute princess. Accolades were showered upon him, his name murmured in resentment, envy, and fear in equal measure as he projected the aura of the murdering harlot he knelt before. Until he left them behind to continue his efforts against the false prince, he bowed to uncover the truth that revealed the real Wyatt Staples. And when he found it, oh, how he hated him. How could such a lowly nobody prove himself to be a crucial factor so many times? And yet there was nothing truly special about him. No hidden records in his academy days that could justify his actions. His skill as a fighter pilot was proven even in a limited scope by his instructors. But there was no more than that. Jade clenched his hands tightly until his knuckles crackled. There has to be more about him. What am I missing? Or is it really all that there is? What prospect is more terrifying? That I'm failing in uncovering the truth behind that man, or that I've seen all there is to see and still be unable to comprehend him? Where are his limits? He thought deeply, his attention neatly divided between his current task and castigating himself for his failures. Letting out a controlled sigh, Jade pushed Wyatt Staples out of his mind. Personal grievances were beneath him. If their paths crossed again in the future, then he'd do something about him then. There was no telling when a tool could prove to be useful. And if Tamir's marionetting turned out to be successful, then the obtuse, persistent, infuriatingly stubborn problem that was the white Periton would solve itself in due time. His shift continued uninterrupted until the signal came to change. Silently, he disconnected from his station, erasing any and all traces of his inquiries and changes, and left it for his replacement to fill the gap. As he was about to exit the room, 2 well-dressed aides approached him, offering a polite nod as they stopped in front of him. Lieutenant Ilidor Fajuli, Commander Lukacs Ishtal wishes to speak with you in person. "Please follow us," one of the aides said as they turned in unison. Jade smiled internally. The moment he'd been working toward had arrived. A traitor to the Duke he was. But Lukak Ishtol was a competent man close to the prince and the perfect gateway to re-infiltrate his command staff. For the principality, he thought in a celebratory tone, treading dangerously on mockery. Matcha Finnegan Grand Palace Council Chamber. Amelia Finnegan fanned her favorite hand fan with the heraldic shield of her house embroidered into it. The prince was absent for the moment as he needed to personally oversee other aspects of the conflict that didn't require the attention of his privy council just yet. Distant negotiations with other houses and personally reviewing the reports of his diplomats and various agents. Everyone did their part. She above all others found the scope of her responsibilities increased as the prince had so graciously granted her the position of Senil in the absence of his sister and Redford Kalin. She knew that was the sole reason the prince considered her for such a role. But it wasn't a move that she'd soon forget, as he still chose her above Juliana Winfield and Damien Valto, whom she believed would be his most prominent remaining options. Regardless, as her legislator, she had the power and authority to listen, give commands, and voice his opinions in his stead. So far, this council's meeting had been long and dull, filled with endless talks, finger-pointing, and the usual butting of heads from the factions that formed shortly after the prince's power was consolidated, and an effective defense could be mounted. The advent of Prince Alexander's claim to the throne with the backing of Duchess Sylvia Emerald had only served to create more chaos in an already difficult-to-manage situation. There were 4 factions to consider. The first was the largest, which she led. The Ravens, as they were known in tentative whispers. Those who were loyal to the Prince House Astor and supported his rightful claim as prince. George Linter, to the shock of no one, led the dogmatists. Loyal to the prince and the principality, there was no doubt. But they also held its traditions, laws, and structure as immutable. Then there was Vivian Tavis, who led the moderates. Loyal to the prince out of personal benefit rather than true loyalty, but who would show their support for one faction or another based on set interests, which usually entailed means to further their houses' political influence and power. Finally, Martin Banter led the smallest faction, the so-called Josephians. They were openly loyal to the prince. This was true, but it was an inherited loyalty distilled from the memory of the previous prince, Joseph Astor. The dullness of the meeting came to a close as General Nebukaro Tempest finished his impassioned speech regarding the improvement of supply lines and heavy armored support for potential future invasions against traitor garrisons, occupation forces, and the liberation of Allied installations. A most riveting topic of interest that only managed to make her yawn twice. Truly an outstanding feat. She fanned herself twice, ready to set the meeting adjourned when Commander George Linter made a motion to speak. So very typical of him to wait for the last moment to make his voice known, Amelia criticized before accepting his motion. The council recognizes the right of Earl George Linter, commander of the Communications Division, to speak. Thank you, Martian Amelia, George said before turning to the rest of the council, prominent nobles from various houses. He held his breath momentarily, giving himself a small dramatic flair before addressing the chamber as a whole. My fellow lords and ladies, through great effort, unfaltering loyalty, effort and sacrifice, we've escaped the clutches of the treacherous Duke Dra, halted the advancement of his forces, and now we've begun to charge against those foolish enough to pledge themselves to him and his cause. We are the true loyal sons and daughters of the Principality. Applause of approval followed his proclamation, mainly from his faction, but there were several who joined in the spirit. Amelia set her gaze on the old man with curiosity. It was a rare occasion when he decided to employ eloquence instead of force. So far, her interest had been piqued, and the fear of hearing him blame another for a minor misstep exited her mind. The chamber fell silent as the applause died, and George continued, however, we must not lose ourselves in the moment. The traitors, be those loyal to Duchess Emerald, inept idiots blindsided by an unworthy charlatan calling himself the true prince, or those who've bent the knee to Duke Draymore, have for all their misguided shortcomings, bonds of fealty and honorable service, shown not only restraint, but adherence to the ancient traditions, stipulations, and the laws responsible for the perseverance and continuity of the historian principality. Make no mistake, for as bloody as this succession dispute has been and will likely become, it is nothing but a droplet of scarlet vitae in the vast sea that a civil war can claim from all of us. Let us not forget that there are other enemies who care not for our internal struggles. The Arabian Commonwealth, our longest enemy, will not stand idle if we were to devolve into a civil war. They didn't do so in the past. Why would they now stay their unworthy, muddy, genetically altered hands? George raised a hand before him. Then there is the Akanti hierarchy. Have we not received confirmation that they are mobilizing several of their fleets for unknown purposes? Who is to say they won't dare strike against us? And must I remind you of the threat uprisings launched by pirates, rebels, insurgents, and other so-called freedom fighters, not to mention the twisting vines of Dresden raiders? Rear Admiral Martin Bant signaled his protest. It was granted a moment later. You failed to mention, Commander Linter, that these external and internal threats have been exacerbated by the actions of Duke Draymore and his desire for control and power. His hand has been gentle, and this I concur with, for it is the truth. But to call his motives honorable would be a gross misinterpretation. He may not wish to claim the throne for himself and limits himself to the laws of house disputes. But if he is made Lord Regent, then the prince of his choosing will only become a continuation of his ideological push. A puppet prince, nothing more. Amelia closed her fan as she made her voice known. Personal grievances can be discussed in more private settings. Rear Admiral. Nevertheless, a valid point has been made. Commander Linter, whilst your views on the traitors who have rejected the rightful rulership of our liege are to be admired for their forwardness, bluntness, and sincerity, I must beg the question as to why you see it as a necessity. George stood up unshaken. It is merely to illustrate another potential unfortunate development within our ranks. Madame Senel, my intention is to bring attention to their honorable practices. The black ships employed by Duke Draymore are bereft of dignity and are tools for cowards to spit upon our infallible rules of engagement. Shameful as their usage is, I must admit, they are powerful, and most importantly, they operate within the right hands. Call them cowardly, call them dishonorable. Describe them as whatever befits your ramblings, Commander Lintar. But don't insult this council by obfuscating your true intentions behind a veneer of respect. What is this threat you speak of? Vivian Tavis declared as she passed a hand over her bald head. I speak of a most insidious danger, Commander Tavis. The threat of feckless ambition, of unworthy service, of those not fit for their stations extending their hands, expecting to be rewarded by doing what their duty commands them to do. George said, his expression showing his distaste and resolution in equal measure. I speak, of course, of the emergency measures His Majesty has instituted slowly and methodically over the past weeks. You dare question the motives of our liege, Linter? Asked Martin, eyes glaring at the older man. I question the long-term consequences, George countered. Have we not examples of this happening? Of misguided nobles granting commoners positions above their station only for them to fail miserably or worse incite rebellion and discontent among their kin. You're reaching far beneath your already limited comprehensive abilities. Linter protested Viven. How many commoners have been elevated to positions far beyond their station? I only know of one, and not even I can deny that such a promotion was warranted, and later on deserved alongside his elevation into formal nobility. That is precisely my point. He turned to the council members once more. One no-name compost hauler got lucky. Despite the heroics involved and the salvation delivered to Princess Clara, he was but a commoner. How many other unworthy plebeians will try to emulate such steps? How many will find dissatisfaction once their small, meager, insignificant contributions do not receive the same reward Baron Staples was showered with? Are we not suffering from a lack of competent personnel? Asked Martin, pointing a finger at the aged commander. This is not a war proper, Linter, as you have illustrated yourself. We cannot conscript the noble sons and daughters whose talents would be instrumental in our cause. It is their choice to join or not. They are far too preoccupied with their own personal companies and businesses, managing the affairs of the land they hold, and are weighed down by their responsibilities. The prince, in his foresight, has allowed commoners who display talent in the fields we require to be granted additional permission and assigned minor tasks. Has this not eased the pressure from our command staff, allowing us to act faster and with more clarity? He scoffed. I dare you to name a single commoner who has been made into an officer or given any significant amount of power in any leadership role. George narrowed his eyes. That right there, that line of thinking is the danger I'm speaking of. That sickly, twisted frivolity directed at our ancient traditions and beliefs. Give the commoners a taste of power, and they will crave more and more as if they were ever hungry animals. They'll start to think that they are equal to true nobility, that they can do what is demanded of us, that they can replace us. They know not of our responsibilities and what it entails to rule and guide. They are lazy, greedy, and lacking in any manners and decorum. Nobles lead, commoners follow. Nobles rule, commoners obey. That is an imperative that has existed since the principality's foundation by Julius Astor himself. A balance that has ensured the continued existence of our glorious nation for over 4 millennia. A fist landed on his desk, emphasizing his point. Mark my words, these emergency measures will incite rebellion and anarchy if they are not curtailed. Amelia frowned slightly, pointing her fan at the commander. Commander George Linter, your opinions are your own, although there is reason within them, she said diplomatically. However, you once again have failed to acknowledge in more than a passing remark the unique circumstances that resulted in the ennoblement of Lord Staples. His elevation and current status, whatever grievances you experienced, are yours to keep. Leave these talks to social circles. The commander bowed his head in respect. Certainly, Madame Sino, it was my intention to merely bring light to a possible and very real potential threat from within our ranks, so that you, His Majesty, our rightful liege, and my fellow lords and ladies may place proper consideration and caution onto such a delicate topic, for I believe I must remind no one of the decision that no doubt contributed to the unfortunate demise of our previous Liege Prince Joseph Astor. Amelia felt like rolling her eyes, but managed to contain herself, choosing instead to merely return the man's gesture with a matching polite nod. The tension in the air was thick. Her fellow ravens showed no support toward the old man's opinions. The moderates, as always, remained neutral, even if they showed disdain for the words spoken. The Josephians had been insulted, but wisely chose to bite their tongues down, at least for the moment. Prince Joseph Astor had been a controversial prince in more ways than one. Beloved by some, respected by many, and seen as an idiot by several, his idealistic beliefs were just that, idealistic in nature. Nothing more. She rose to her feet, and everyone else followed suit. Council adjourned. Resurgence of magnificence. Andrew Cast's quarters. Andrew Caston stood before his operations table as a holographic map detailing several patrol movements danced before his eyes. His eyes traced over 3 different systems, most of them zones of conflict running alongside their borders with House Finnegan. Like a pincer maneuver, 2 larger task forces had entered the territory of his house, represented in the map with its heraldic shield, that proud, fierce bear he'd always looked up to. From the north, Admiral Damien Valto pierced through the Andresi system, cleverly punching through it like a spear tip and burying the shaft into the thick hide of the bear. 3 systems had been blockaded, and all significant defense forces had been either destroyed or captured. Any significant station was put under blockade and continued to push forward with only delaying actions taking place to slow them down. He had the firepower and numbers to counter that incursion, but not the means to spare said assets. Not yet, but that was only one of the prongs. Admiral Vasicati Reed led the other. Much like Valto, Reed pierced into Khan territory through Jintrax. Already weakened, he found little initial resistance as he continued inward. However, his advance had been all but halted by one of his nieces, Rear Admiral Benona Indada, a progeny of his wife's parent house. To any less experienced commanding officer, the strategy would be clear. A 2-front assault meant to divide enemy forces, costing time and sowing confusion. But that was the difference between an inflexible buffoon like Cornelius Tigan and a man such as himself. He saw the attack for what it really was. A large-scale diversion meant to cause a stalemate and focus on the problem in front of him, while the true threat attacked from behind. The Aorist Reaper had already captured 3 of his kin, with Eigerkin as the first to suffer her wrath. No pronunciation had been made other than what had already been said. No demand for ransom, nor the heads of his kin presented as trophies to be paraded. He doubted the second princess would be so compassionate as to grant them a quick death. Did they still live? Were they dead? He didn't know. What he did know, however, was the ridicule and the humiliation inflicted upon them. Quick heightened-run assaults after announcing a demand of surrender. It barely respected the rules of engagement, but that was enough to push away any criticism. Redford Callan had orchestrated those assaults. There was no doubt. It had his fingertips all over the place. The Vorpal strike was infamous for his wit, quick thinking, and the almost dishonorable tactics employed during combat. Quick, precise, clean. It was marvelous from an outsider's perspective, how efficiently simple the strategy was. They had killed no more than what was needed, lingered only for as long as necessary, and left once their main objective was completed. It was commendable in its own right, and something worthy of respect, since so little noble blood was spilled and wasted. Many would see that as a direct insult to the honor of their house. Even more would take it as a personal spurn. But I'm not like those men. I'm Andrew Ken, he said to himself as he picked up the knife resting in front of him. Slowly, he twirled it around gracefully, balancing it between his fingers while his eyes never left the map. I'm not so easily deluded, Reaper. I applaud you, however. It is a valiant and sensible strategy. Cause mayhem through humiliation, impudence, and overwhelming victories, he chuckled. I won't be drawn out so easily, Princess. If you want me, you'll have to work for it. I wonder how long you will burden the shame of seeing your plan fail. His smirk faded, replaced by a stony expression. Yet, if you move quickly and claim more of my blood, I will be pressured to respond to your attacks. Not to mention that you have him with you, he said before swiftly spinning where he stood, launching the knife to a large painting featuring House Staples' shield and 24 encrusted knives, and over 50 slashes and puncture points. The knife landed on the stag's right eye, encrusting itself deep into the fabric. Andrew strolled deliberately until he was less than 2 meters apart from his target practice mark. He stared at it with cold, calculating indifference for long moments until his lips parted. My fury has not subsided, Wyatt Staples. Yet my irrational eye has passed, leaving me with calmness. Casimir has retreated to one of my house's most remote villas. Did you know that? He's been tended to, of course. Medics, physicians, therapists, psychiatrists, and more are ensuring his emotional and mental stability. His arm and leg are being cloned, and he'll have them back in a few weeks. He will reclaim his life and forge a new path. But what you did to him, I can't forgive. The instigator has paid for her stupidity. It is your turn to pay for your brutality. Reaching for his most recently flung knife, he yanked it out only to then impale it on the stag's forehead. Blood begets blood. Wyatt Staples proclaimed Andrew as he made his way back to the map, but I'm in no hurry. I am patient. We shall meet, and when we do, I'll make you pay for what you've done. In the name of my son's anguish, pain, and suffering, you will know my wrath. Andrew Khan continued running analysis and multiple strategies in his head for several minutes until his exo contacted him. What is it? He asked, barely distracting himself from his machinations. My Lord Andrew, we've received an urgent request for reinforcements from Lady Yosid Ken and Lord Lanet Tome. They are mobilizing all available jump-capable defense ships to the Fanher system. They've detected a confirmed large-scale pirate incursion led by Pirate Lord Escuit Raven Tumidante. They will arrive in the Fanher system in 3 days. Their simulations predict that they can engage the pirates and delay them for several days, maybe a week, stalling them and preventing them from routing until reinforcements arrive. Local SOS beacons have been issued, but there are precious few jump-capable warships in the area. What are your orders, my lord? Raventomb. Andrew slurred the name with hatred. Twice that man had escaped him in as many decades. And because his meager, little so-called empire was beyond principality-claimed systems, his pleas to dispatch a fleet strong enough to destroy the threat of not only Raventomb, but the barbaric pirates languishing just a few systems afar, had always landed on deaf ears or worse. His father interfered his every attempt to gather house forces to deal with the problem personally and permanently. He closed his eyes, fighting against the storm within him, urging and clawing at him to dispatch a task force with post-haste. But the storm was weakened by the second as he analyzed his options, limitations, and the reality of conflict. There was nothing he could do to aid his relative and blanket. His forces were too far away and would unarrive in time to do anything but bring relief that civilian ships could provide. Other local patrols were hindered and too weakened to offer nothing more than at most diversionary strikes. Worse, thanks to the second princess, the abolisher of indignity had drawn plentiful ships away from patrols, their commanders and captains choosing to rally around the precious dockyard from any potential follow-on assault, further crippling the weakened ships able to respond in time. He sighed in defeat. For a third time he will elude me. No matter. Once the Lord Regent claims victory, Raventomb and all of his pirate ilk will know that the bear's maw is deadly. Above all, Operation Hammerlow takes ultimate priority, he said, regaining his resolve. Send this message in reply. I, Count, apologize profusely for my inability to dispatch reinforcements as requested. Fight on with all your might and repel the pirates yourselves. Inflict as much damage as possible. Teach them humility and respect. Make their incursion a bloody one so that they leave with less than what they arrived with. That is all. Understood, my Lord Andrew. It shall be delivered, said the XO. Then the connection ended. Andrew clenched his fists until his nails dug into his skin, drawing blood. Ultimate victory shall wash away my impotence in the end.